begun. And, you know, it starts out by talking about Sarah Clendaniel and Brandon Russell, these two people who were arrested yesterday for saying that they were going to completely destroy Baltimore. Right. Their goal was to shoot up power substations. This is what Congressman Adam Kinzinger was worried about when he told Axios last year, I don't think that's a bridge too far to recognize. It's going to be armed groups against armed groups, targeted assassination and violence. Donald Trump yesterday used his Nazi-infested social media platform to push a renewed call for violence by Americans against Americans. Senator Chris Murphy tweeted, quote, "It will likely get little attention to no attention today that the current frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination just told his supporters to start arming themselves for a civil war to overthrow the government just in case he loses." And sure enough, that's what Trump was retruthing over on his website. There actually is an active movement within the United States trying to start a civil war. They're armed, they are serious, they have shot up 9 power stations now across the United States. This was going to be the 10th. They tried to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan. They tried to hang the vice president of the United States. They've already murdered numerous people across the country. You may not recall names like Pat Crusius and Anders Breivik or James Fields, but the members of a dozen different white supremacist groups in America can tell you the details of the lives of the El Paso murderer of 23 Hispanic people, the Norwegian killer of 77 liberals, mostly children, and the man who killed Heather Heyer and injured dozens others at the Jews Will Not Replace Us Charlottesville rally. These people think of themselves as students of how to start civil wars, and they know that you know, about 15% of Americans, many of them, in fact, probably the majority, certainly the majority of them white Americans, who were in the middle class 40 years ago when Reagan came to power, are no longer in the middle class. They know that ever since the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954 by the Supreme Court mandating for the first time in American history racially integrated public schools, that ever since that time there has been a freak out among white supremacists and racists in America that they can exploit. And this has, of course, also led to the movement that's very close to accomplishing its goals to destroy public education in the United States and replace it with racially segregated private schools. This is what they're all about. I mean, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie last year was saying, quote, the tipping point will come when, quote, 30 to 40% could agree that the American government was legitimate tyranny and needed to be thrown off. Those trying to bring down the American government need to have sufficient power without asking for extra permission. It should be right there and completely available to them in their living room in order to effect the change. So this guy calling for armed revolution against the American government, he is now on the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Federal Government, on the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, on the Committee on the Judiciary, on the Committee on Rules, on the Committee of Transportation, on the Committee on the Judiciary. I mean, you know, Ilhan Omar, oh no, you can't have her. She's a black refugee. But Thomas Massie, no problem. Meanwhile, over at the Daily Caller, this was founded by Tucker Carlson yesterday. It leads with an op-ed, quote, "It's 2025. The United States is in chaos. Chinese super shoal soldiers roll in from Canada and criminals rule the streets. You could use a weapon of war, but the Democrats won't allow you to have one that isn't California compliant. The media told you guns are bad and that working out is toxic masculinity. But the Chinese look pretty fit and they have guns. So do the criminals victimizing you. Alas, all that critical race theory and TikTok are useless as they break into your home and kill you." Right. This is, you know, a real thing. These people thinking that violence and the threat of violence is going to bring about political change in the United States. And it started with that 1954 Supreme Court decision and the 1980 election of Ronald Reagan and his institution of neoliberal economics, his destruction of the American middle class, his taking us from a nation that was 1/3 unionized to about 10% unionized. All of those things together have basically destroyed the main currency of government, which is trust. In 1956, almost 80% of Americans said they trust the government to generally do the right thing. Today, it's about 20%. Why? Because we've had 42 years of Republicans constantly whining and complaining and trash-talking the government of the United States. These people, you know, hate our current government. They hate this idea of a so-called socialist government that has things like Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, housing supports, low-cost education. I mean, all of this stuff. It's just they're totally opposed to it, and this is where America is at. So what do we do about this? How do we step back from this precipice? I mean, you know, when there's this shared sense of grievance, small things can trip off a big problem. So first, Americans have to trust that their democracy works. How do we do that? We roll back Citizens United, and we put into place an election system that is consistent across the country, like Canada has, Elections Canada, national standards for elections. Second, we have to, you know, basically help out the people of all races who've been the victims of 42 years of Reaganomics. Other advanced countries do this by expanding union rights, expanding the social safety net, including free and low-cost medical care, free and low-cost college and trade school. I mean, when people have good jobs and income, they tend not to become terrorists. Our slogan should become, if Canada can do it, why can't America? And finally, and it pains me to say this as somebody who back in the 60s as a member of SDS was surveilled by state police and local police. But nonetheless, I think that the final step is that if we're going to avoid the possibility of a fascist takeover, as has happened in Russia, Turkey, Hungary, Egypt, and the Philippines, our state and local police.
We say fight back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb, Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm.
His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it if such a thing is even possible? This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Valentine's Day. What a day. I'm back from Michigan. My niece passed away yesterday while we were at the hospital. It's a sad story. Please no need to discuss it on the air. Just FYI. It's tough on my brother in particular and his family, but you know, I guess these things happen. Anyway, it's Valentine's Day. Are you doing something for Valentine's Day? Louise and I kind of gave up on it years ago, but you know, every now and then we'll do something. I actually got her something that I haven't given her yet, so don't tell her. We've got a lot to talk about today. Why would anybody embrace fascism? I want to start off with that. Also in the first hour here, Donald Trump knew that his election conspiracy theories were lies. This is going to make it really hard for him to weasel out. I mean, you know, the law requires consciousness of crime, generally speaking. I mean, it is possible to commit crimes without intending to. You know, those kind of fall into another category. But when you have been informed by an organization that you paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to investigate the vote in every single state, and they come back and they say there's no fraud anywhere, and then you bury the report and hide it and continue to lie about fraud, I think that's going to be problematic. We'll get into that in just a moment. Also, should private companies be going rogue to try to cool our atmosphere? What the heck is going on with this? This is a pretty amazing story. I'll tell you about that this hour also. In the second hour of our program, our buddy Cole Stangler, the reporter for Agence France Presse, France 24, you see him on TV a lot, will be with us to fill us in on what's going on in France. Why are hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people in the streets all across the country really, really seriously pissed off because Macron wants to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64? And why in America? I mean, you know, Reagan raised the retirement age from 65 to 67. It just took effect in the last couple of years. Why aren't Americans protesting? We'll talk about that in the second hour. Also, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have a plan to increase your Social Security money by $2,400 a month simply by lifting the cap. I mean, this seems like the most common sense thing imaginable, but every single Republican is opposed to it. Will Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin blow it up? We'll see. Well, will it even get out of the House? We'll see. But we'll talk about that in the second hour. Also, in Arizona, a massive new voter suppression effort that has already thrown numerous Hispanic women in prison for simply carrying their neighbors or friends' ballots to the ballot to the post office, to the ballot box. This is a city that does not have mail delivery. They don't come by your house to pick up your mail, and a lot of these people don't have cars. It's the average income in this city is $15,000. So I'll give you all the details on that. On another Republican strategy to suppress the vote of brown-skinned people. And also in our third hour, to start our third hour, Chalice Blythe with the Satanic Temple Reproductive Rights Campaign is going to be with us about their new program. It's called the Sam Alito's Mom's Religious Abortion Clinic. This is wild. And also in the third hour, a new amendment to bar Nebraska kids from church camps. Whoa! What's next? Censoring the Bible? Well, maybe. I'll tell you about that in the third hour of the program. And inside the push for a nationwide ban on abortion medication. Keep an eye on this. In all probability, this ruling is going to come down this week. Also, Nikki Haley just announced that she's going to be running for president of the United States. That's going to be entertaining. She's, pretty much in the Trump camp. And there's kind of three kinds of voters. Well, we'll get to that, too. So an awful lot to talk about. I want to start out with my rant today from HartmannReport.com. Why would anybody embrace fascism? And, I realize that there have been not historically, but, over the last couple of decades, there have been basically kind of two camps about what's animating the hard right. What's animating the Republican Party? What's animating the GOP's base? And one camp argues that they're just all racists. This is the leftover of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan's Southern strategy, combined with George Herbert Walker Bush's Willie Horton ad, and then Donald Trump, the Mexican rapists are coming, and asshole countries, and keep out the Muslims with his Muslim ban, and All that stuff is added up to just this massive flow of racism. That said, I remember a time when, growing up in lower middle class Lansing, where, all the white people that I knew had good jobs. They were working at Fisher Body or General Motors. They were making cars. They were making, good money, $30 an hour, which was a lot back then. They had good benefits. And yeah, they were probably mostly racists, but they weren't voting for racists. They weren't, carrying around Confederate flags. They weren't strapping AR-15s to their chest and strutting around like street gangs, threatening people's lives. What's the difference? What happened? What brought the racists out of the woodwork? And in this article, basically, I lay out this hypothesis, which, I've shared with you in the past, but I think, it's worth revisiting from time to time. That what is, in fact, all over social media, people are asking, why would anybody embrace fascism? I mean, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about fascism. There's this worldwide movement toward fascism. Rachel Maddow opened her show with it last night on MSNBC, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I watched it on the plane from Salt Lake City here. We had a stopover. And I think it's safety. On Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very bottom, of course, you need to breathe, you need to drink water, you need to, be able to do bodily functions, basically, maintain your body temperature, stuff like that. But right above that is safety. If you're crossing a street and all of a sudden cars are whizzing by you in both directions, you're not thinking about, what you're going to have for dinner or what you want to do with your career goals or whether you should propose to your new girlfriend or what. I mean, what you're thinking about is, how do I avoid getting hit by a car? And what has happened over the last 40 years as part of the Reagan Revolution and in response to the Powell memo, Lewis Powell's memo, is that there has been this huge right-wing infrastructure built, and I would call it a neo-fascist infrastructure, frankly, because they're all promoting fascism. Not necessarily pure Nazism, but something damn close. And, that includes 1,500 right-wing radio stations, that includes, if you look at the top podcasts, the top 100 podcasts, like the top 40 of them, at least 2/3 of them are right-wing podcasts. There's enormous money behind these. They promote them like crazy. They on social media, they get promotion. You've also got, the owners and people running many of the social media sites are themselves billionaires and conservatives, and so they're pushing these memes as well. And so now what you have is kind of latent racism that has had a fire lit under it by the destruction of the American middle class. We've gone, and largely the white middle class, although since the 60s there was a growing black middle class and a Hispanic middle class as well. And all have taken a hit. The blacks and Hispanics have been hit harder than the whites, but the whites have been hit hard enough that, the middle class in America has gone from 65% of us when Reagan came into office to 45% of us today. So you've got, that 20% that got screwed, the title of one of my books, The Undeclared War on the Middle Class. And these people who have not literally been screwed if you use some of the definitions, but I'd say, financially they've been screwed. And, they know it, they're just not sure why. And so you've got this huge media structure around the country that kind of started with Limbaugh on radio. It started with Rupert Murdoch, the Australian billionaire on television, that have a very simple answer for these largely white people who have been financially screwed by 40 years of Reaganism. They're saying, okay, who did this to me? Why does my job pay half of what I paid in 1980? And the answer these people will say is, it's because black people want your job. It's because brown-skinned immigrants want your job. It's because women want your job. And if we could just go back to, pre-1965, when women had to have a man's permission to get a credit card or open a checking account, when women generally could not enter the workforce unless it was a secretary, when black people were relegated to very specific jobs, janitors and things like that, and by and large separated from the rest of society. We had segregated water fountains. We had We still had segregated schools. If we could just go back to that, society would stabilize itself. This was Russell Kirk's great theory. He wrote a book about this called The Conservative Mind, From Burke to Eliot. And it starts out with Edmund Burke. And Edmund Burke was the famous British conservative philosopher, political economist back in the late 1700s, who wrote that, it does me no harm if a man is allowed to engage in a profession as servile as that of hairdresser or candlemaker, but it does society considerable violence if such a man is allowed to vote. I'm slightly paraphrasing, but that's pretty close to the exact quote. And this perspective has been adopted by the Republican Party. And now they've reached the logical end of this. They're actually openly, nakedly, enthusiastically promoting fascism in the United States. And they've got this whole network of right-wing billionaires behind them that are also pushing fascism in this country. And they've also got, all these radio stations and podcasts and everything. Interesting, I believe it was the Brennan Center did this study. It was published last week. I mentioned this briefly on Friday, that some of these right-wing podcasts are 11 times more likely to have lies in them than our left-wing podcasts. 11 times. That's 11,000%, right? Or 1,100% more lies. And, you wonder why people are acting crazy. You wonder why people are so angry. You wonder why people have gone so nuts. Simple answer is they're being lied to. They're being told that they are not safe. Now, they know financially they're not safe, but they're being told that that lack of safety is the result of Democrats, of liberals, of queer people, of black people, and of women. And therefore, they need to go after those people. And thus, we've got all these white guys strutting around with AR-15s strapped across their chests, wearing Confederate flags. Surprise, surprise. What do you think?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Do you think I've nailed the example of this, or what's actually going on here, or is there something I'm missing? I'd love to hear your thoughts on why fascism is rising in America right now. And welcome back. Hang on just a second here. Got to get my show notes up. Oh, I have no. Okay, great. Let me just expand on that a little bit on the rant that I was just sharing with you. And by the way, I want to thank Jefferson Smith for filling in for me yesterday. I should have started the show with that. Jefferson is a great guy, a good friend, and does such good talk radio. I was, I caught a little bit of the show, and I caught the tail end of the Super Bowl. I don't know if you want to continue any conversations about that. There were some fairly contentious plays during the game. I'm not, generally a big football fan, but I know how it works. I know how it's played, and I enjoy watching it. I just typically don't have the time or energy, and my wife doesn't like it at all. So I could watch it while I was in Michigan. But it was a fascinating game. I always root for, unless Detroit's on the, which is where I grew up. I lived in Detroit for a while, grew up in Michigan. Unless Detroit is playing, I always root for whichever team is down. So for a while, I was rooting for the Eagles, and then I was rooting for the Chiefs, and I just, I like it. It's no problem with that. But, why would anybody embrace fascism? I think this is a problem. I know this is a problem that is happening all over the world. And one of the main drivers, again, there's this synthesis of fascism and racism. And one of the main drivers of this, frankly, is immigration. You've got all these Syrian refugees who are showing up in Europe, and they're brown-skinned and they're Muslims, and it's causing a white supremacist, racist backlash in countries like Italy, Sweden, Germany, France, Hungary. In fact, Viktor Orban made his fortune on that. So let me pick up your calls here. Charles in Gold Hill, Oregon. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I was listening to our local right-wing radio station this morning solely for the weather report, as we have snow in southern Oregon this morning. Mm-hmm. And they were referring to our government as a Republican form of government and really condemning Biden for the allowing Venezuelan refugees just to walk across the border willy-nilly. I just wanted to bring this up, and you were talking about fascism rising. They're doing it by calling it Republican form of government.
Well, that's how the founders referred to it. You know, one of the distinctions that they were trying to make before 1787, if you now this is kind of a metaphor, but if you looked in a dictionary under the word democracy, it would say see republic, and if you looked in the dictionary under republic, it would say see democracy. In other words, everybody understood that they were basically the same thing. But James Madison, in his attempts to sell the Constitution, came up with, and it's in one of the Federalist Papers, and it's one of the first 10 Federalist Papers, he separated the definitions. And he said, you know, a Republican form of government is government, you know, where laws and rules, but, you know, we elect our officials and we have representation. Democracy, and of course, there was an element of truth to this, the old-fashioned Greek democracy, you know, either everybody had to vote, or in the original demos, 6,001 people had to vote. And so, you know, he claimed democracy was mob rule. Now, that only lasted for about a decade, that definition. And by the time Thomas Jefferson was elected president, they were using the word democracy and the word republic interchangeably. But the Republicans have revived Madison's argument. So, yeah, I'm with you. Charles, thank you very much for the call. Thanks for the information. It's fascinating. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. You know, James Baldwin was one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, of any type, but his insights into black cops and police in general are just brilliant. This is one of his writings about black policemen. He said, black policemen were another matter. We used to say, if you must call a policeman, for God's sake, make sure it's a white one. And we hardly ever did call a policeman. A black policeman could completely demolish you. He knew far more about you than a white policeman could, and you were without defenses before this black brother in uniform, whose entire reason for breathing seemed to be his hope to offer proof that, though he was black, he was not black like you. Baldwin goes on to talk about, you know, black cops and his father and his relationship with his father and just the general violence perpetrated against black people. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. And welcome back. So a couple of other stories I wanted to share with you real quickly here before we get to your calls. Donald Trump knew, now we have more and more evidence, I mean, you know, knew that he lost the election and that everything he said after that was a lie. Now we have Bill Barr's testimony that it was BS, that Trump's claims were BS, that he, in fact, he quit his job over this on January 7th. You have you know, multiple, we haven't heard from Mark Meadows yet, but multiple people within the White House, were particularly those who were in charge of his polling and you know, knowing where the election stood, were just, you know, right up front telling him, you lost. And he wanted to lie through it anyway. And now we discover that he hired this outside research firm, it was called the Berkeley Research Group, paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars to look into 6 states in the 2020 election, looking for fraud and irregularities. And they took all of the, quote, evidence that's in this, you know, this phony BS movie, 2,000 Mules, all the stuff that Rudy Giuliani had, all the claims that were being made by Trump, you know, about Ruby Freeman down in Georgia and all that. They took all that stuff and carefully examined it with professional investigators and attorneys and whatnot, and came to the conclusion that Donald Trump lost the election, period, full stop, end of discussion. He lost the election. And they told him that. And they published this whole report about it, the detailed item by item by item, all these phony claims that were being made by the Trump people, by Eric Trump, by Don Jr., by Laura Trump, you know, I mean, just the whole bunch of them, right? And what did Donald Trump do with that report? Stuck it in a drawer or something. I mean, he deep-sixed it. He did not allow it to go public because it contradicted his lie. Everything was based on this lie. And criminal culpability requires knowledge that what you're doing is actually a crime. And so what this report does, irrefutably, I think, is establishes that Donald Trump knew that when he sent that mob on January 6th that ended in the death of 8 people now with 3 police officers and a couple of protesters, that when he sent that mob, and he was responsible for the death of those 8 people and the injury of 140 police officers, directly responsible. And he wasn't just directly responsible for it, he was responsible for it with malice, because he knew that he was sending these people to their deaths based on a lie. Why isn't this guy charged with manslaughter as well as sedition?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I got to tell you real quickly about what's going on in Israel. I'll do that on the other side of the break and then pick up your phone calls. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Separated by the Border, a birth mother, a foster mother, and a migrant child's 3,000-mile journey by Gina Thomas. This is from the introduction. How good is your Spanish? And would you be able to take in a 4-year-old girl? She's from Honduras and speaks minimal English. The social worker had texted me on a Friday afternoon. I sat at my desk, bent over my cell phone, reading and rereading the text. My thoughts traveled to Honduras, bachata, ballots, clothes hanging on the line. So many things in our lives seem to have prepared us for this moment. My son was attending a bilingual school. I'm a former ESL teacher, and my husband Andrew and I speak Spanish. Plus, Honduras already had a piece of my heart. As those thoughts came, I tried to push them away. The voice of logic came in loud and strong. We had just gotten into a routine with Emma, our foster daughter. 2 foster children and 2 biological children would be too much for us to handle. Our first month as foster parents taught us this, and for the sake of everyone involved, we knew it would be very unfair to try that again. A little later, the social worker called and left me a message saying, "It looks like the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the ORR, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, will get her on Monday in court. It'll only be the weekend. Call me back after you talk to Andrew." I asked Andrew when I got home, "We can manage 4 kids for one weekend, right?" He said he doubted it would last only a weekend, but I convinced him that if ORR and ICE were involved, they would get her on Monday. A few minutes later, I called our social worker and said that we'd do it. When I walked into the social worker's office, Julia was sitting there in a brand new bright pink Barbie t-shirt. The social worker said they'd found the t-shirt in their clothing closet and Julia wanted it. Beautiful, soft onyx curls framed the girl's umber face. Her dark complexion made me speculate she was from a coastal region. She stood in dirty flip-flops next to the social worker's chair, chit-chatting away in Spanish without a care in the world. "Julia's been talking my ear off," the social worker said. "She's so sweet, but I have no idea what she's saying." Another worker brought in a black tote bag with a few other items from the clothing closet, including a pair of sequined high-top sneakers that Julia had picked out. I began to speak to Julia, pronounced Julia, in Spanish. She seemed happy to hear her mother tongue, but her body language didn't budge. I read that signal loud and clear, so I kept my distance and sat down on the floor. "¿Cómo se llama?" I asked. "Julia." "¿Cuántos años tienes? How old are you?" "4. She looked older than 4 to me. I had been told her parents were deported and she was left behind. She was under federal jurisdiction. I would find out later this was all misinformation. I signed some papers and said, "We'll see you on Monday." I asked Julia if she would come stay with me and my family for the weekend. She smiled. I told her I had 3 other kids. Her eyes expanded with excitement. On the drive home, she jolted my Spanish from its slumber. The social worker wasn't kidding about how much this little one talked. On April 6, 2018, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a new zero-tolerance policy in which the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice would partner for the sake of prosecuting illegal entry into the United States. Sessions said, quote,
If you cross this border unlawfully, then we will prosecute you. It's that simple. If you smuggle aliens across our border, then we will prosecute you. If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you, and that child will be separated from you as required by law. If you don't like that, then don't smuggle children over our border." End quote. 6 weeks later, almost 2,000 children had been separated from their parents at the border since the zero-tolerance policy took effect. When Sessions announced the administration's new policy, I couldn't comprehend the cruelty. I also wondered if it explained why a preschooler was living under my roof. Julia had come to live with me and my family in February of 2018, and it felt surreal to be a part of her story. She had first been separated from her mother, Guadalupe, called by her nickname Lupe through the rest of this book, by smugglers who were paid to bring them across the border. Julia had then been separated from her stepfather, Carlos, by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, likely because what was recognized by the Honduran government as stepfather was not recognized by the U.S. government as the same, a detail I didn't understand until an immigration expert read the first draft of this book and explained it. Julia had already suffered much trauma, and separating her from her stepfather had only inflicted more. The weight of the trauma that we, as a nation, began inflicting on vulnerable children and their parents was cruel and unusual punishment. When I heard that my own country was going to begin separating children regularly from their parents as a policy, it broke me. Reality became surreal, and Andrew and I learned to live in it, separating the trauma from our emotions so that we could survive. As the veil of Oz is ever lifting from my white evangelical American eyes, what I now see is simply heartbreaking. Government-secured human rights are mostly for privileged white people. Julia is not white. Julia is undocumented. Julia's first language is Spanish. Julia is a girl. These are all labels that set her back in a society made by and for white, passport-holding, English-speaking males. But God, who is neither white nor male, despite my use of the pronoun he, shines his good news on every human being alike. The book is Separated by the Border by Gina Thomas.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. I just realized Michigan State University is a school. So this is another school shooting. I mean, you know, the school shootings started out with high schoolers, you know, to Columbine, and then they went to grade school, you know, to elementary schools with Sandy Hook, and then back to high schools with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and now colleges. I suppose you could argue that I think it was '64, when Richard Speck was up at the top of the clock tower in whatever university that was. Was that the University of Kansas? I'm not remembering, but wherever it was. Or Texas. Yeah, it might have been in Texas, San Antonio. I'm not sure, but in any case, you know, it started out in universities. Now it's come full circle. But if you look at a graph of school killings and gun ownership, what you find is the United States is like 4 or 5 times more killings than any other developed country, and has 4 or 5 times more guns. And even 4 or 5 times is probably an understatement. I was just looking at a graph myself a moment ago. This is not, you know, scientific math. It's like looking at a graph. Okay, I wanted to mention real quickly what's going on in Israel. We are seeing this trend toward fascism happening all over the world, excuse me. Orban in Hungary now has shut down his press by basically forcing them to sell out to oligarchs and pulling the broadcast licenses for the remaining networks. It's happening rapidly in Poland under Duda, who is kind of mini Orban. It is happening in India right now. There's several good Substack newsletters about this, you know, what's going on in India, but India is rapidly turning fascist. It's been that way in Singapore for a while, although oddly, Singapore actually seems to be loosening up a little bit. It's certainly been that way in, across the Middle East kingdoms. Now we're seeing it in Israel. Hundreds of thousands of people, or at least 100,000 people, showed up in the streets yesterday, holding placards and banners and flags and whatnot, saying that they're unhappy with Netanyahu. Here's what's happened, and we're going to see the exact same thing happen here in the United States, except that it probably won't succeed the way that it probably will in Israel. Netanyahu is the prime minister, and he does have a majority in the parliament. So he can actually change laws. Trump is no longer president, and while he's got 20 or 30 wingnuts in the House of Representatives and a handful of them in the Senate, I don't think he has the ability to force change, legislative change, although he did pack our courts. But both these men are criminals. Netanyahu, or are alleged to be criminals. Netanyahu is under indictment for multiple charges, including bribery and fraud, and he's going to be, the prosecutors have done their job. He's been charged with these crimes, and now he's going to have to stand trial before these judges. And so what he's trying to do is basically put the judges under his own control, so that he can rig his own court cases. And I mean, this is pretty breathtaking. AP News, written by Joseph Fetterman, he says the first vote is expected to take place next Monday. Netanyahu controls a solid majority in Parliament, and there appears to be a little to prevent him from pushing ahead. He said, in the works is a proposal to give Parliament the power to overturn Supreme Court decisions it does not like, moving Israel toward a system like Hungary and Poland, in which the leader wields all control over all major levels of power. Several of the opposition, politicians are quite upset about this. The organizers, there were 100,000 people, including Arab, women rights, and LGBTQ activists, as well as opposition parties. But I mean, this is here's the killer sentence. This is the third paragraph in this article by the Associated Press, which is not, the nation's liberal outlet. And so I'll just quote it for you. His opponents say that Netanyahu, who is on trial for corruption charges, has a deep conflict of interest. They say his planned overhaul will destroy the country's democratic checks and balances and is a poorly disguised plot to make his criminal case go away. That's what this is all about. Netanyahu is trying to weasel out of being convicted and possibly even going to prison for the crimes he has committed or is alleged to have committed. And Donald Trump will be doing the same thing. Up until this point, Donald Trump has been attacking the investigators, the FBI, and now he's got his toadies, Gymnasium Jordan and these guys in Congress with their weaponization of the federal government committee, trying to go after the intelligence agencies who found out that Trump was a Russian asset, who found out that he was lying about his election in 2020, who found out that he was passing, or alleged to be passing intelligence along, at least certainly his campaign was, to Russian intelligence in 2016 to help him get elected. And since then, passing along intelligence, or at least his son-in-law Jared, was to Mohammed bin Salman about who were the dissidents within Saudi Arabia, so MBS could have them arrested and executed. And, this is all starting to come out. And in Georgia, he's got a major possible indictment coming probably Thursday of this week. The judge is going to unseal parts of the grand jury testimony, and we will learn, broadly speaking, what the grand jury thinks of Donald Trump and the crimes he's committed. And I'm fully expecting Donald Trump will at that point stop attacking the FBI, stop attacking the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, stop attacking the police and the Capitol Police and everybody else who was injured or who was, in opposition to his schemes, and start attacking our judiciary. He's done this before. When Trump University was being prosecuted for a fraud for which he ended up pleading, being convicted and having to pay $25 million in restitution to the people he had scammed or some of the people he had scammed. Donald Trump pointed out that the judge, his name was Curiel, was his last name, which is an Hispanic name. Curiel was born in like Chicago or New Mexico or something, but his parents were from Mexico, and so Trump kept calling him a Mexican judge. Now Trump is regularly pointing out over on his Nazi-infested message board, Truth Social, he's constantly pointing out that the prosecutor in Atlanta who's going after him, Fani Willis, is black. The state attorney general in New York who's going after him, Letitia James, is black. The Manhattan district attorney who's going after him, Alvin Bragg, is black. And, you know, from Trump's point of view, or at least from his statements, he's saying, this is black people out to get me because I'm a white guy. I'm wondering, where are the white prosecutors? I mean, what Trump did in Georgia, he did in at least 5 other states. I mean, we may not have tape recordings of it, but we certainly know that we have fake electors. The Trump campaign coordinated with them to get these fake electors out. But none of these white prosecuting attorneys want to go after Donald Trump. What's the deal? I'm just, baffled by this. So anyhow, I've thrown a lot on the table here. Let's pick up your phone calls and see what you think about all these things. Marvin in Skokie, Illinois. Hey, Marvin, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
This, in light of relevant to the gun problem in the U.S., and I'm glad you brought it up earlier, I have a proposal. Whoever among your listeners or yourself has access to the president's ear, Mr. President, a suggestion. Use open source AI to help you design an executive order which requires that every gun buyer purchase, along with the munition, registration, licensing, and insurance.
You're singing my song, Marvin. I wrote a book about this, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, and that was my main proposal was, hey, we do this with cars, and you have a right to drive. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, or Section 7 even says, the country can build postal roads. You have a right to drive. You have a right to own a car. So, hey, get a license, get insurance.
I'm willing to give you credit, Tom, for giving me that part of the idea. But the use of AI is an original idea on my part.
Yeah.
Because it is supposed to get you where you want to go in the sleekest way. And I would also suggest that let it help you design the best way to gain the cooperation of the gun dealers' trade associations in the issuance of this executive order. And that's my proposal.
Sounds like a good one.
Who has access to someone who is very influential with the president and therefore could put this in his ear?
That's a good question, but
I wouldn't give it to a senator, because even though he may be a Democrat who is the chair of the Justice Committee, he might be getting some benefits from the NRA. So I wouldn't try to do it by that route. I would try to do it more directly by getting at Mrs. Biden or someone who has the ear of the president.
Yeah. Let me, here. I just went into an AI program. This is on neva.com, neeva.com. And if you sign up with them for an account, you have access to their AI program. And I just asked it, how are Republicans promoting fascism? And it says, Republicans have been accused of promoting fascism, with some suggesting that President Trump's endorsement of violence against the government is an example of this. Others have argued that the Republican Party has been complicit in the rise of fascism, citing the party's failure to condemn white supremacists and other extremist groups. Further, some have argued that the Republicans' embrace of authoritarianism and its disregard for democratic norms are signs of a growing fascist movement. That was written by artificial intelligence in the last 10 seconds at neva.com. So I think you might be onto something, Marvin. Thank you for the call. It's, why don't we just say, you want to own a gun? That's fine. Just like, you want to own a car, that's just fine. But, you got to have a driver's license. You got to have a shooter's license. You got to have registration. You got to keep your gun registered every year. Pay a small fee to manage the system. And you got to have liability insurance because cars can kill people and guns can kill people. This is just common sense.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Or AI starts writing legislation. I don't know. We'll be right back. And hang on just a second here. I'm trying to add Neva to my search engine and allow this extension to run in private windows. Okay, and I'd like to change your default. Yes. Okay, Neva is now my official search engine here. What fun! All right, picking up your phone calls. Regina in Chicago. Hey, Regina, what's on your mind today?
What you said earlier about the middle class and fascism and things like that. Mm-hmm. With me being out of Chicago, just to share a little story with you. Back when Obama was getting ready to run, the rumors were going around. Mm-hmm. And, going to the nail shop, the beauty shop, that's where you get a lot of neighborhood talking going on. Sure. And we were discussing the issue. Yeah, the social center. We were discussing the issue that we didn't want him to run. We were terrified and afraid for his life.
I heard a lot of black callers talking about that in 2008 when he was running. Was either A, he can't win because he's black, or B, he's going to go the way of Martin Luther King. Look out. Right.
And because in those social centers and in the neighborhood, we were living what is going on now. It's just that things that are going on now are way more exaggerated, mm-hmm. but it's nothing really, really new.
Yeah.
And so, he went on and we know the history, he put his hat in the ring and blah, blah, blah. But mm-hmm. It continued. Racism in this country never really went away. We all have to, yeah.
Oh, no. You're right.
No, it never really. It became somewhat manageable, shall we say? Mm-hmm. Tolerated could be another word. But when Obama won, this country, certain factions, the Republicans and things like that, they lost their ever-loving minds.
You are absolutely right.
Because, they what? He won? And I can just imagine the language that was going on in certain rooms.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what precipitated that meeting in Washington that we've all learned about. That,
You're talking that steakhouse. What was it called?
Yeah.
I used to live right over it. Anyway, I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. So, I'm sure in the smoke-filled room or whatever you want to call it, they're saying, we got to stop this, the N-word or whatever, or this Negro. We cannot let him do anything.
Right.
And that was the call to arms to all these racist groups and stuff like that. We just can't. And so all those fears became easier to fan the flames and things like that, and that's one of the things that helped it just get out of control.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that you can't untangle fascism from racism, because every fascist movement in history has had scapegoats. You know, for Hitler it was the Jews. For Mussolini it was the dark-skinned immigrants who were coming in from Northern Africa. You know, for the Swedish Nazis it's the Syrian refugees. Here it's black people and Hispanic people. You just can't disentangle them. Excellent points, all, Regina. Thank you. So nice to hear from you. Have a great morning.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. Minutes past the hour. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. Just some amazing stuff going on over on Fox News. Megan Lapp and David Stevenson have been regular guests across Fox News, and they're claiming to be all worried about whales, all these whales that are dying off the east coast of the United States, arguing that these are the result of the windmills that are out there, right? The ocean wind and the work done to install them. Well, it turns out that Lapp works for an organization whose largest donor is Charles Koch. Whose largest donor is the Texas Public Policy Foundation that gets their money from Charles Koch. And Stevenson works for a group whose largest donor, the Caesar Rodney Institute, is the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. So if you have friends who are watching Fox News and they're concerned about the whales, you might want to let them know what's going on. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls, Charles in Toll House, California. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for picking up my call.
My pleasure.
I think I have a solution to the fascism problem, which is really a key problem to a lot of other problems. But first off, it was the University of Texas, Austin, 1966. Charles
You're right.
Whitman.
I remember now. You're absolutely right.
Second of all, Niccolo Machiavelli did a great job back in 1515 or so, early 16th century, boiling fascism down.
Yeah, with his book, The Prince.
Basically what he said was, in The Prince, right? He said, fear is a stronger motivator than love.
Yep. Among other things. I mean, it's a book long a book. It's a book you can read in an afternoon, and it's still in print. I mean, I encourage people to read it because it's basically a how-to manual for Trumpism and Reaganism.
Just an absolutely seminal book.
Yeah, it really was.
Now,
you realize that book was his job
Charles,
application, by the way. Bill Barr did something like that, too, with his 17-page memo to Donald Trump. But Niccolo Machiavelli was trying to get a job with the local, head guy. I forget who it was. It's been decades.
He was an official in Florence.
Right, and he wrote that book to try to get the king or the head lord or whoever to hire him as a consultant. And it didn't work, actually, as I recall. I mean, again, it's
probably one of the Medicis, I think.
Yeah, it may well be. I mean, it was 40 years ago that I read that, and I read the story. So I'm, memory fades over time.
It's one of those books I kind of reread in my mind continually.
Yep. Yeah, or you spot when you see Ron DeSantis talking and going, that's Machiavelli as item number 7.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you, Charles.
The second book is a book by my friend Charles D. Hayes, Evolving in a Dangerous World Made Racism Inevitable. Okay. And basically his solution there, he talks about the two parts of the brain. We've got the reasoning part of the brain, which we think is responsible for all of our thinking. Right. And then we have the limbic part of our brain, which is responsible for looking out for saber-toothed tigers out there. Right,
that's our emotion. That's the emotional brain that we share with all mammals.
Right, exactly. And the solution is to train the reasoning part of the brain to filter that brain better. It's a basic educational problem. It should be part of our educational system everywhere, so that we filter out that.
Or at least just
so
recognize which is coming from where.
Really not under a threat.
Yeah, and if we recognize which is coming from where, then we can assign meaning to it. My daughter went with me to Michigan, and she works with badly addicted people here at the hospital. Helps run the addiction program there, and we were talking about the stories people tell each other, tell themselves, in particular, like for panic attacks and things, or oh my God, I got to get my drugs. And one of the most effective ways around this is to simply. That's not me, that's coming from something in me, but that's not necessarily me, and this will pass. And it's like an extraordinarily, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's one of the really extraordinarily effective ways to deal with panic, depression, not necessarily serious deep depression, but transient depressions, things like that. It's just to look at those things and go, oh yeah, look at that. I'm experiencing that. Isn't that interesting? Rather than get totally sucked into it and eaten alive by it. Charles, I got to run, but thank you. That was great stuff. Great stuff. We haven't talked about Machiavelli in a long time.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox, no ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by P.E. Moskowitz. It's The Case Against Free Speech, the First Amendment, Fascism, and the Future of Dissent. This is from the introduction. This book is not anti-free speech. It is anti the concept of free speech. It's an important distinction. Everyone should have the right to say what they want. I will not argue otherwise. I am not an authoritarian. In this book, I will not argue that the United States should adopt laws banning racist speech, like the ones that have proliferated throughout Europe, for example. I think those laws are often counterproductive and end up being used against leftists instead of against racists. I won't argue that Nazi speech should be outlawed as it is in Germany. I won't argue that the First Amendment should be reformed nor more firmly upheld. This book is not about whether the First Amendment is good or bad. This book is about why the First Amendment is nearly irrelevant, except in its power as a propaganda tool. In the following chapters, I will argue that free speech as a concept is meaningless, that it is a dialectical smokescreen more than an ideal to be upheld, that in a grossly unequal society, in which a few corporations control the means of media dissemination and a small group of the ultra-wealthy bankroll entire political movements, there can be no meaningful definition of free speech.
On paper, I'm free to speak as a billionaire. I am as free to speak as a billionaire. Yet I do not have the power to change laws through political donations, to influence college curricula, or to quash entire movements for economic liberation. And still, I hold more speech power than most. I am a published author, and my speech is sanctified by the gatekeepers of my publishing house. Therefore, the path to free speech, I will argue, has less to do with a law about speech, or many laws, than with ending racism and inequality. Throughout U.S. history, disparate groups have claimed to cherish free speech more than their enemies. Unionists in the 1920s saw free speech as synonymous with striking and ultimately class revolution. Today, conservatives are the group to most often shroud their politics in free speech, arguing that any silencing or protesting of their speech runs counter to U.S. values of freedom and liberty for all. But as I hope to prove in this book, free speech has never really existed, because freedom and liberty have never really existed for the vast majority of Americans. Instead, the U.S. has systematically acted against those values, suppressing the opportunities, speech, movements, and actions of the masses, especially people of color and anti-capitalists, in order to favor the free flow of capital to the owning class. This oppression and suppression have been constant since the founding of this country, and therefore free speech is a hollow signifier, pointing to a past that never existed. The funny thing about free speech is that it's been used to fight for and against these liberties, both as a guise for the wealthy and powerful to oppress the poor, like the Koch brothers and their supporters using free speech to push through anti-democratic legislation and rip apart campaign finance laws, and as a rhetorical tool for the working class to further their cause, as happened in the early 1900s when leftists argued that free speech includes the freedom to riot, and the ACLU argued it was the only way to prevent a violent revolution. I don't argue that one definition of free speech is more legitimate than the other, but that they are all relatively empty signifiers, hiding more tangible structures of power and ideas underneath them. So why write a book on free speech if I think the term is essentially meaningless? Because the concept holds so much weight in our country. We argue endlessly about whether it's being trampled on, whether college students hate it, whether the government is adequately upholding it, but we rarely ask what free speech is, or how we got to the free speech crisis we supposedly face today. When you scratch the surface of conversations over free speech, you find more difficult issues underneath. It's much easier to talk about the ability of conservatives to speak on college campuses than about the systemic racism, sexism, and transphobia college students experience. And those are the things that students who protest campus visits by right-wing conservatives are actually fighting against. It's easier to fantasize about a country that values free speech than to grapple with the fact that we place so much emphasis on free speech while jailing dissidents and allowing tens of millions to live in poverty. What is free speech to someone who works 60 hours a week and has no time nor any platform to use their supposed right? There is relatively little literature and philosophy on free speech, despite the fact that it has been in constant contention since the founding of this country. Even the legal history of the First Amendment is sparse for something so foundational to the values of our country. A few have seriously grappled with ideas of what free speech does and does not mean, most notably literary theorist Stanley Fish, who has argued that the term does not mean much at all. Leftists like Noam Chomsky have written about free speech tangentially in their explorations of media as a propaganda tool. Most history books on speech are written as hagiographies, unquestioning the intent of the Founding Fathers and their morals, with a few notable exceptions, such as Laura Weintraub's The Taming of Free Speech. I don't intend to fill the yawning gap of research history and philosophy. This is not a definitive account of free speech, but a necessary intervention, prodding us to be more critical of the term, and maybe along with it, of the other lofty concepts we must hold near and dear. The case against free speech.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people in France are in the streets right now. Well, yesterday. I don't know about today. We'll find out in just a moment. On the line with us is our old buddy Cole Stangler, the French-American journalist based in Marseille, France now, covering labor and politics. He's a correspondent for the international news network France 24. His website, Cole Stangler, Stangler.com. That's also Cole Stangler is also his Twitter handle. Cole, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we talked. Fill us in on what's going on in France right now. Why and what?
Yeah, thanks as always for having me on, Tom. So this is a protest movement that's erupted over the government's proposal to hike the earliest possible retirement age in France from 62 years, where it is right now, to 64 years old. Again, that's the lowest level at which you can retire with a full pension. So the government reform would do that. It would also, a little bit more specific measure, it would accelerate the phase-in of the minimum amount of years you need to work in order to get a full pension. So that would be 43 years, and that would also be coming in more quickly than previously planned with this reform. So you have these two measures that have provoked a lot of opposition. Essentially, we've had multiple days of strikes and protests over this proposal from Emmanuel Macron for a few reasons. Just a couple of the real simple ones are, for one, on the left, the labor movement and the left-wing parties that have been mobilizing against this reform consider the right to retire with dignity to be sort of a bedrock issue that they've fought generations to have. People have likened it to, I've been speaking with left-wing MPs here who've said that really the question of retirement touches on this core issue of having time off from work that the left has always been fighting for generations. So first,
MPs being members of
Sunday
parliament.
off, Saturday off.
MPs is a phrase most Americans don't know. They think you're talking military police. You mean members of parliament?
You're right, Tom. Yeah. So members of parliament. So deputies is the term here for the National Assembly. So left-wing members of the National Assembly in France, one I was speaking to, François Ruffin, said this is, retirement is like these other battles that we've had. The woman has always fought for, to have time off from work. No, Sunday off from work, Saturday off from work, less, hours of the week that you're working. Retirement is something that was won. The system was created after World War II by a communist labor minister. François Mitterrand, the socialist president who won in 1981, one of his big moves was to lower the retirement age. So you have this kind of long history of fighting for a lower retirement age and fighting for retirement as a sort of bedrock left-wing value in general. That's what has the left mobilized. But obviously, Tom, what we're seeing with this mobilization, over 1 million people in the streets on multiple occasions, shows that there's a deeper sense of injustice here. And that's because a lot of people fundamentally believe this reform is unfair. France spends a lot of money on maintaining its pension system, around 14% of its GDP. But the benefits that you get at the end of your career are pretty strong, especially compared to the United States. And so people feel like the government really isn't maintaining their end of the social contract here. I think that's what it really boils down to. This reform, fundamentally, it's going to affect two. It's going to affect blue-collar workers, the most people that have, put in long careers in tough professions that are just waiting for that, the ability to retire. They're going to have to wait a little bit longer. It's going to affect women more than men because they tend to take more time off from work, for raising families, for leave after childbirth. And it's going to affect low-wage workers who often begin their careers earlier. So, if you think about this, already blue-collar workers have, than white-collar workers, they have less time to benefit from retirement, which is sort of a grim reality. So there's a sort of sense of injustice that I think goes beyond the sort of smaller community of the labor movement and the left, and that's why you have this sort of big opposition that shows, right. 7 in 10 French people are opposed to this reform.
Now, here in the United States, when you talk to Republicans about why they want to, why, for example, Reagan raised the retirement age here from 65 to 67, recently took effect. And now you've got, numerous Republicans talking about raising the retirement age from 67 up to 70 here in the United States. And the argument that they always make is that, the system just doesn't have the money to pay for all these retirement benefits unless we raise taxes on rich people. And Republicans are absolutely unwilling to raise taxes on rich people. We now have a proposal that was just introduced yesterday by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to lift the cap on Social Security. Right now, if you make over $150,000 or $160,000 a year, you don't pay anything into Social Security. They wanted to lift that cap so that billionaires are paying into Social Security, and that would solve the problem. Is that kind of dynamic, this financial excuse and protecting of the very, very rich in France, what Macron is doing? I mean, is he just kind of a Bill Clinton neoliberal?
Yeah, so this is a huge debate right now, this sort of numbers game that's happening. The government, that's been the justification for this reform, as one might expect. They're saying this is a difficult move. It's maybe unpopular, it's maybe tough, but it's ultimately necessary for the financial viability of the system. They point to the fact that you have a small deficit that's expected to emerge in the coming years, as evidence for essentially the need to have this reform. They say it's gonna generate these savings to plug that hole in the deficit, that budget hole. So the government's own state body that researches the pension system projects this to be around 10 to 12 billion euros. Sounds like a lot of money. It's around 1% of GDP when you consider how much money France spends on the retirement system overall. So the government has this financial justification for it. It's not entirely backed up by their own research, and I think there's, perhaps one of the compelling arguments I've heard against the government's cases comes from people who've said, well, look at the government's budget, that its own budget proposals. Look at the government's budget proposal to the European Commission, which they put forth every year, in which they say they expect to generate savings from retirement reform to finance the rest of their agenda. So I think, if you wanted to be a little bit more cynical about the government's line here, that this is supposedly necessary for the financial viability of the system, you might say something like, perhaps this reform is ultimately generating savings that are necessary to finance the rest of the government's agenda, which revolves around tax cuts for business, tax cuts for the ultra wealthy. I think that's a more cynical kind of way to look at it, and frankly, a fairly compelling argument you might make. Because again, like I said at the beginning, the government's own body that looks at the financial health of the system does not say that, we have a system that's on the brink of collapse. So you had a lot of debate around the numbers. The system is quite different from the United States, but I think one parallel we can draw is certainly this case that somehow, the proponents of cuts that are going to hurt working class people are saying this isn't financially necessary, when in fact, there's a lot of debate just about the numbers that they're advancing.
Now, Cole, correct me if I'm wrong. My recollection is that when you and I first met, when you started becoming a guest on our program, that you were still living here in the United States. And I know that you've been a keen observer of American politics and writer about it, for numerous publications over the years. As well as, then you moved to France and now you're working with France 24 and all that sort of thing. If that's the case, if I'm remembering correctly, could you give us, from your perspective, I mean, you've lived in both worlds now, what are the differences and similarities between the United States and France that is causing hundreds of thousands or millions of French people to go out on the streets pissed off because Macron wants to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, and yet here in the United States, just in the last 2 or 3 years, and this was put into place by Reagan in 1983, but he was, smart enough to put a 40-year time, make it a timed landmine that would last long, that wouldn't happen until he was long dead. Of raising the retirement age from 65 to 67, and yet there's not a peep from Americans about it. It's like we're just eating it, Why?
Well, it's a good question. I think one of the big differences when you look at the countries is that in the United States, people often have supplemental plans for retirement, whether it's 401ks or maybe they have some sort of plan with their employer.
Pension.
It might not be a defined benefit plan, but they have supplemental plans. They're not only relying on Social Security. Some people do, but they're not. A lot of people aren't only relying on Social Security. When you look at France, the concept of a sort of private retirement fund is alien to most people. Mm-hmm. Most people in France rely on this system for their retirement. There's not really a plan B for a lot of people. So I think immediately it touches people. It touches people more significantly. I think that's one reason, just how expansive this system is. The second reason is that the pension system here is very, very effective. People have an attachment to this because it works. Mm-hmm. If you look at the rate of senior poverty, for instance, in France, it has one of the lowest rates among all OECD countries. I think it's just below Denmark with the lowest rate of senior poverty. So better than the US, better than the UK, better than Germany and Sweden, these other kind of hallmarks of social democracy. So very low rate of senior poverty because of the system. And secondly, there's a very high, what's known as a net replacement ratio. So in other words, the share of benefits that you're getting from your pension compared to what you were earning over your career. In France, it's something like 73, 74%. In the US, it's much lower than that. I think around 50%, if not lower than 50%, 40%. So I think for all those reasons, I think these are really important distinctions. So more people are concerned by this reform, or they feel it immediately. And it's affecting a system that's really effective for people. They've been sort of paying into the system their entire lives, often at quite high levels of quite high contribution levels. They're expecting to, in return, get a decent retirement, and that's sort of part of the social contract in France. And the government is essentially saying on their end, we're now changing the social contract in the middle, the very end when you're expected to benefit from it. Yeah. I think all that is a big reason why. And then another big reason is, the strength of the labor movement and the left in France, which has, I think, perhaps more power than the United States. It's a whole other discussion, though. Yeah, indeed. And one for the future. Cole, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always so nice talking to you. Thank you. Thank you. You can check out Cole's work over on France 24, his website, colestangler.com. You can tweet him at Cole Stangler. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have a proposal to fix Social Security. They just dropped it in the Senate yesterday. I'll tell you about that. And women are being jailed in Arizona for voting. And welcome back. Let's see here. Fred in Manica, Illinois. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind today?
Fred? Hi, Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, you are on the air, Fred. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
I just called in. I'd like to put forth an idea. The root cause of fascism is the selling of unrestricted capitalism. Unrestricted capitalism is indirect fascism. We need to differentiate the cause of fascism from those tactics to gain and maintain power. Of course, the tactics to gain power include Citizens United and massive propaganda campaigns. Mm-hmm. This is relevant because many citizens have been sold the concept, which is that we have a false argument of capitalism versus socialism. This, of course, capitalism is not a form of government. Everybody refers to it that way. It's not. This has gone on for nearly a century, right? Selling capitalism. The end game of capitalism is fascism. Capitalism is equivalent to fascism as a concept and a natural progression.
I would agree if you modified the word capitalism with the word unregulated or laissez-faire or something like that. I think it is possible for heavily regulated capitalism not to produce fascism.
It's defined in our country. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Yeah.
And throughout the world, right?
Yeah.
And capitalism is all those things. They're letting these guys do whatever they want. As soon as they can start dumping all their money into politics, we're in fascism.
Yep.
Is my argument.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, Denmark is a capitalist country, but they're not a fascist country. And we're moving in that direction rapidly because the U.S. Supreme Court legalized the bribery of politicians. Excellent point, Fred. Thank you very much for making that. I appreciate it. Nicholas in San Cristobal. Hey, Nicholas, it says you disagree with me?
Yes. This is partly, by the way, to be a completely distractive phone call for you, if you catch my drift. Yeah, I do. It's something you said last week, and it ties in directly with your conversation about fascism. And please excuse me, I had an immense amount of gum surgery done.
Oh, no. We need to get right to it, though.
Yeah.
We have a minute, 20 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. I disagree with your comment last week. You suggested that no foreigners should be allowed to own property in the United States. And you just a little while ago you were saying that racism is a part of fascism. This is hard for me to speak. So I don't like anything that bumps up against anything like xenophobia or racism. And given the fact that a lot of the conversations about property ownership have revolved around Asians, particularly Chinese, buying up properties in places like Vancouver, I think Seattle as well, certainly San Francisco, other places as well, it kind of freaks me out, and I was just stunned to hear you say that you thought no foreigners should be allowed to own property. Why? Because there are so many easy ways to control the situation.
For example?
And you probably know what they are. Slapping big taxes on the transactions. Vancouver slapped 15%, and $1 million is entry level, amazingly. Mm-hmm. So 150,000 immediately went into local coffers. Mm-hmm. And, they're interested in people bringing their entrepreneurial skills, coming to retire in the country. So I think that going too far and saying no foreigners should be allowed to own property, I think we need to simply restrict.
You're right. What I was speaking of was
I want you to rethink that, please.
Foreigners who are investing in American residential and commercial property, specifically to turn it into rental properties. In other words, to extract money out of the United States via that property as an investment. If somebody comes in here with a green card and wants to buy a house, I have no problem with that. Nicholas, thank you. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. So the Sanders-Warren plan would tax the rich to increase Social Security payments. I think at the opening of the show I said $2,400 a month. Forgive my misstatement. $2,400 a year. Do that. $200 a month. And if we simply raise the cap, right now, if you make under $160,200, it changes every year because of inflation. It was in the 140s or 150s last year. I know it was in the 140s the year before that. But it's now $160,200. If you make more than that, you pay not one penny in Social Security taxes. And, that's wrong. If you make more than $500,000 a year, you pay not one penny in Medicare taxes. That's wrong, too. So Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in the Senate and Representative Jan Schakowsky, one of my heroes in the House of Representatives, and Van Hoyle, Democrat of Oregon. And Van is, I think, Van was just elected. Do you know, Sean? I'm not sure who Van Hoyle is. But Van Hoyle is a Democrat from Oregon, according to this article. Maybe they got the state wrong, or maybe I just missed something. But in any case, Jan Schakowsky and Van Hoyle in the House and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in the Senate have introduced what's called the Social Security Expansion Act. And what the Social Security Expansion Act does, it does not raise taxes on 93% of households who make under $160,000. Excuse me, under $250,000. But if you make more than $250,000, now they're probably going to have to change this to $400,000 to satisfy Joe Biden's campaign promise of not raising taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year. But even at $250,000, if enacted, this is from Common Dreams. If enacted, the bill would have raised more than $3.4 billion just from the nation's 11 highest paid CEOs just in 2011 alone, including $2.9 billion from Tesla and Twitter executive Elon Musk. Whoa. And that would allow Social Security not only to be solvent until 2096, when, probably pretty much anybody listening to this program is long gone, But it would also allow Social Security to immediately raise your monthly benefits by $200 a month. So, you know, not too shabby. And I'm assuming that that would apply to people on Social Security disability as well. As the Sanders office noted, quote, before 1935, when it was signed into law by President Roosevelt, about 50% of the nation's seniors were living in poverty, as well as countless Americans living with disabilities and surviving dependents of deceased workers. Nearly 90 years later, the senior poverty rate is down to 10.3%. And in 2021 alone, during the onslaught of the pandemic, Social Security lifted 26.3 million Americans out of poverty, including more than 18 million seniors. And then he goes on to say, despite this long legacy of combating poverty, more must be done. While the average Social Security benefit is only $1,688 a month, nearly 40% of seniors rely on Social Security for the majority of their income. 1 in 7 rely on it for more than 90% of their income. Nearly half of Americans age 55 and over have no retirement savings at all. So that, you know, and by the way, this is liked. I mean, it's not going to pass Congress because the right-wing billionaires are lobbying against it and giving money to politicians, particularly Republicans. But 72% of Republicans want this to happen. 75% of independents want this to happen. 85% of Democrats want it to happen. Overall, 78% of likely voters want this to happen.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So consider calling your member of Congress at 202-224-3121 and just saying, raise the damn Social Security cap, please.
Book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society. to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family, and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espin: in Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. One of the things that has always baffled me is why, after the Mueller report found, after the Mueller investigation found that there were 10 explicit prosecutable cases of Donald Trump committing violations of the law by obstructing justice, that when Merrick Garland came into office, he chose to ignore those. And now I think the statute of limitations has run out on them. I believe it was a 5-year statute of limitations. He had that first year, he could have prosecuted those. Why? Why is it that on October 30th, 2016, Harry Reid, then the head of the Senate Democrats and the of the Senate, wrote a letter to Jim Comey saying it's clear that you have in your possession information about the connection between Trump and Russia and are refusing to release it. Yet you rushed out this information that you were going to investigate Hillary Clinton, and there was no there. Why is this? There's a video with the entire letter from Harry Reid over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. All righty, one last story for you here, and then we pick up your phone calls in Arizona. You know the story of how in Texas and Florida, Governors Abbott and DeSantis have been proudly parading black people in front of cameras with, in shackles for voting, typically voting while felons, right? Both states make it illegal for felons to vote. In Florida, there was a citizens referendum that legalized felons voting, but then the state legislature came in and said, yeah, but you've got to prove before you can get registered to vote that you don't owe anything on any on any old tickets or anything like that. And it's really hard to prove a negative, right? So you've got to go get this certificate from the state, and nobody knows how to do that. And so it's basically, if you're a felon in Florida, you're still screwed. You can't vote. But a lot of felons didn't know that. They knew that the law was passed, passed Congress. It got a lot of publicity. And so they go to the DMV, and the DMV says, sure, yeah, sure, you can vote. Here you go. Here's your registration card. They vote, and then, they get arrested, and Ron DeSantis puts them on TV. That really effectively suppressed the black vote in Florida in the 2022 election. We know this now, that it helped Rick Scott get elected. It helped Ron DeSantis get elected, because so many black people in Florida were just, frankly, afraid to vote. And we saw the same thing in Texas. And now it's gone to Arizona, although in Arizona, the large minority population in that state is not black, it's Hispanic. And so they're going after Hispanics in California, in Arizona. This is from Raw Story by Carrie Lerner. It's from the Michigan Advance, actually. Dateline San Luis, Arizona. The small city in San Luis is tucked away in the far corner of Arizona, closer to Mexico than any major U.S. city. The community is 95% Latino. And it's the kind of place where you know your neighbors and their parents and cousins. And in this place, they don't have regular postal delivery. The mailman or woman or the postal carrier doesn't come to your home. You have to go to the post office. And, the post office is in a part of town where most people have to drive there, and a lot of people don't have cars. The average income in this town is a little under $15,000 a year. It's a poor town. And so what would happen was, on election day, people would get, absentee ballots, which are legal, have been for 30 years in Arizona. People would get their absentee ballots, and, they'd give them to a friend or a neighbor who was going to run down to the post office and drop them off. Well, last year, Arizona outlawed that. Actually, in 2016, they made it a felony punishable by prison time to carry somebody else's ballot to the post office to mail it. And it got challenged in the courts, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 2021, year before last, the Supreme Court said, that's fine, you want to suppress the vote in Arizona, we're happy with that, because the Supreme Court has got a bunch of, frankly, racists on it, racist Republicans. So now the Arizona Attorney General's office has started arresting people, including the town's mayor, Guillermina Fuentes, who carried a couple of neighbors' ballots to the post office as a favor. And there was one of these right-wing people from the so-called True the Vote group who was videotaping at the post office and saw that the mayor was carrying 4 ballots. The mayor, by the way, is a 66-year-old grandmother and a former farm worker. She's a member of the school board and the leader of the local Democratic Party. And she was sentenced for bringing 4 completed ballots to the post office. She was sentenced to a month in prison, a month in jail, and 2 years of probation. And by the way, it's a felony. So she was convicted of a felony. So now she can no longer vote at all. This is all from, this happened last year, this crime, end quote, it's just now being adjudicated. This crime happened last year when Arizona's Attorney General was Mark Brnovich. He's no longer. He was running for the U.S. Senate, actually, during that time. And he was trying to make a name for himself. And so he was arresting brown people and parading them in front of cameras. On October 19th, Brnovich announced 2 more indictments. This is last year, just before the election, a month before the election, against women in the Democratic-leaning town within a county that voted for Trump by 6 points in 2020. The Democratic Attorney General's office, the Republican Attorney General's office alleges that the women collected 8 ballots. Oh my God! And so now, the mayor of the town, Ms. Fuentes, her daughter, Lizette Esperanza, says she wakes up each morning in fear of how conspiracy theorists will talk about her family on social media. We're living a nightmare right now, she said. They're not going to want to vote, especially now, because they're scared. In other words, people Hispanics in the community who have traditionally been voting Democratic are afraid to vote. And this is obscene. And then, you know, and the reason why, by the way, they give their ballots to their neighbors, in addition to many of them not having cars, she notes, this is the daughter of the mayor, she notes, you know, these are farm workers. They leave at 5 in the morning and they come back at 8 at night. Now, when, you know, the post office is open from 9 to 5 or 9 to 4, when are you going to have time to go vote? And if you take time off work, you can get penalized, you can get fired, and you certainly lose money. I mean, you know, the article here notes, before the ballot collection law was passed, it was not uncommon for residents of San Luis to rely on friends, neighbors, or volunteers to bring their ballots to the post office or help return them to a voting center or drop box. But since the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, it is now legal to send these people to jail. This Gary Snyder is the local Republican who recorded the cell phone video that led to this prosecution. He shared it with David Lara, another local Republican, and then that forced the Yuma County Sheriff's Office, the State Attorney General's office, to look into this, and Brnovich launched, he's got an election integrity unit, and they launched an investigation. Uniformed sheriff deputies knocked on their doors early in the morning to ask about their voting history. Prosecutors charged Fuentes with conspiracy, forgery, and 2 counts of ballot abuse. She pleaded guilty to ballot abuse, which is, you know, delivering the ballot on behalf of your neighbor, which is a felony. And the state dropped the other charges. This is just breathtaking. This harsh sentence, this article in Raw Story says, the harsh sentence will also help conservatives, quote, further the narrative. This is from Annie Guana, a Phoenix-based election lawyer. The harsh sentence will help conservatives further the narrative that there is actual fraud in our elections, which there was no evidence of here. In other words, they're going to say, yeah, see, look at all these women that we sent to, these Hispanic women that we sent to prison for voter fraud. Obviously, we have voter fraud. It's amazing. Now, on the other side, there was a 64-year-old Republican white woman who did the same thing, but Brnovich's office, the then Attorney General running for the Senate, because she was white and she was wealthy, she was from Scottsdale, Arizona, she was sentenced to 2 years probation and no jail time at all. Democrats in the House have introduced a bill to do away with this, but the Republicans are saying, no way, don't even think about it, not a chance. We love sending black and brown people to prison for voting. Fascism. It's fascism. Let's pick up your phone calls here. Morris, excuse me. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
How much time we got, Tom?
You know, whatever you need.
Oh, good enough. Let me start here. I was while I was on hold, you were reading a book from Ezra Klein, Why We're Polarized.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I remember from his conversations, what I took from that was the brutal power of negative partisanship. The brutal power of negative partisanship, which feeds our culture wars, right? Which is a euphemism. And all of that is designed, Tom, to mask and hide what's really going on. That $40 trillion of wealth that's been transferred to these guys and these to the top class. They don't even want to pay Social Security anymore, you see. And so then it's working for them. And racism does have a place now in our society. Let's be frank about this. Racism, it blinds us. It blinds us. It changes narrative and focus. We should be focusing on the money, and we're down here in these gutters with these culture wars, okay? And then the next thing I want to get on is regarding the classified documents with the president. Papa Joe is the president of the United States. According to Donald Trump, the president can declassify. So all Papa Joe's got to do is say that stuff that was found in my Corvette, I'm going to go on and declassify that. Okay, what's the next narrative y'all got? Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk to you about is a guy named Scott Horton. I was listening to his podcast. He's on KPFK. You know about these folks, Tom. He's got an anti-war podcast. And he introduced me to a guy named Max Blumenthal. And then I read Max Blumenthal's book called Goliath.
I've known Max for years. I visited Moscow with Max. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you know what I'm talking. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you saying that. That's important. From listening to these guys, I'm getting the impression that Israel is a Judeo-fascist country. Is that an appropriate comment to make?
I think the better way to say it, because the structure of Israel is broadly not, setting aside, as hard as that is to do, what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. But what Netanyahu is trying to do right now is overrule the courts. So if the courts convict him of a crime, he can simply overturn that, or he can have the Knesset their parliament overturn that. And that's the legislation that he has pending right now, which gives him or the parliament the power to simply, ignore even the Supreme Court of Israel. And people are seriously pissed about it, because that then embeds structural fascism into the Israeli system.
What is the definition of fascism for everybody that uses it loosely and whatnot? Just look at it this way. It's an absence of oversight. There is no oversight with these guys, okay?
Yeah, that's a good definition.
And lastly, I want to ask you, Tom, I know you don't know about this because you've been good to your wife. Have you ever heard of MeetSugarDaddy.com?
No.
MeetSugarDaddy.com, that's where Ted Cruz was on. And that's where he met Lauren Boebert, right? And Lauren Boebert's husband, I'm jealous on this one. Lauren Boebert's husband, Jason, he got a contract with an energy company for $460,000 as a consultant. And he don't know nothing about energy.
Wait a minute. Is this her husband, Jason, who whipped his penis out in a bowling alley to show to some teenage girl?
No, I can't go there, but I can go here.
Apparently he's got a tattoo on it he wanted to show off, and he got busted for it. I think he went to jail for it. I don't know if she's got a new husband or not, but if it's only one husband, that's the guy. So she got him a cushy job that pays hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? Really?
$460,000. Now, let me tell you who Lauren Boebert is. This is a woman that had an accident, left the scene of the accident, paid off a witness. Okay, remember now Ted Cruz brought her in the big. Ted Cruz gave $126,000 to a donation for her campaign. Can you believe this? So these are the kind of character people that we're dealing with. I'm going to leave you with this. We got us a new hero. I love this woman. Her name is Jessica Tarlow, Tarlow. She's on the 5, and she knocks them down like bowling balls. She's a progressive, good-looking, sharp woman. Jessica Tarlow. Go to Fox whenever she's on there.
I'll check it out. Okay, thanks a lot, Morris. Always nice hearing from you. Thank you so much. We will be right back. It's 48 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, speaking the truths, the multinational corporations, and frankly, the Republican Party. I'd really rather you didn't know all about.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right here on the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I semi-disagree with part of your gun control.
Okay, go for it.
And it's not because I don't agree with gun control. I think there's something definitely has to be done. I think one thing would be make any automatic firearm purchase age 25 years of age.
Well, you can't even buy fully automatic weapons in the United States. They're outlawed.
No, I'm talking about semi-autos.
Oh, semi-auto, okay. Yeah.
You got to be 25 years of age to purchase it. I think that would help a lot. But here's the thing with your liability insurance.
Mm-hmm.
All it would take is for somebody like Trump to get back in office, decide he don't want to leave office, and he wants to disarm or criminalize the people who will rise up against him by making insurance so expensive that only the wealthy can afford guns. Or otherwise, you have to turn them in or be a criminal owning it.
There's not that many wealthy people, though.
Well, it doesn't matter. If you want to disarm a populace because you want to be a fascist, you can just make laws to do that. And you could criminalize or disarm a large chunk of America just by making the insurance rates so high they can't afford to pay them. So now you either have to turn your gun in or become a criminal to owning it.
Well, that assumes that the government is defining the rates. While you do have government oversight, most states have insurance commissioners. Typically,
who owns the insurance companies?
They put a ceiling on it. Well,
who owns the insurance companies? The same 1% that is trying to push us down.
No, I get that, but the insurance companies are trying to make money, and so they're going to risk adjust. guns.
Yeah, but if you get somebody that comes in that's a total fascist, they'll just tell them to do it.
I don't think that would work.
Yeah, well, we didn't think Trump was going to get elected either.
Yeah, you're right, Mark. You're right. All right, so we've got to tweak this one. Okay.
Well, I'm just saying that there is a possibility for major abuse. I'm not totally against the concept. I just look at the downfalls if you get the wrong people.
Okay. Well, then you write the list. But your point is well taken, Mark. Thank you. Let me ponder that. Carl in Greenville, Michigan. Hey, Carl, what's up?
I want to talk about Merrick Garland.
Mm-hmm.
I think that man could be probably one of the most important figures in United States history if he would do his job. And why don't he understand that?
I think he's outsourced it to Jack Smith, but I have a fair amount of confidence in Jack Smith. So whether the question is when Jack Smith comes back with his recommendations, is Merrick Garland going to follow through on them? And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question, but I doubt he would have appointed Jack Smith to begin with if he didn't intend to follow through. And then, of course, there's that guy, Mr. Her or Hua or whatever his name is, that he has put in charge of It's a fascinating year to be alive, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I just wonder why he don't throw his weight around a little more.
I think he's one of these
and indict the Supreme Court.
Yeah, he's one of these very, very, very careful, very thoughtful guys, and keep in mind he was appointed to the court on the recommendation of Orrin Hatch, one of the top Republicans in the Senate before he passed away. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So you don't think generally of community gardening and cancer and heart disease prevention in the same thought, in the same sentence. But sure enough, this was published in the journal Lancet Planetary Health, a study that was funded by the American Cancer Society, the first ever randomized control trial of the effects of community gardening. And what they did was they started a garden. This was in Denver. It was 291 non-gardening adults, average age 41. And they gave them half of the group. They gave them a garden plot and some seeds and seedlings and an introductory gardening course. And what they found was by the fall that those people who were doing the gardening had increased their fiber consumption by 1.4 grams a day, 7%, which is substantial. And they believe that this will help them with everything from diabetes to certain cancers. It's absolutely a fascinating study. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here, Beth in Valparaiso, Indiana. Hey, Beth, what's up?
Hey there, Tom. Greetings from Valparaiso.
Thank you.
I wanted to just touch on two things. One, the original question you started the show with about why are people turning to authoritarian governments. But before I do that, I have to make a quick defense of Machiavelli. I had a political science professor that he said, all you need to do is read The Prince, and you really don't need to study political science any further than that.
Oh, there's a lot of truth to that.
And right. It's a very practical guide to one of the Italian princes about how to basically rule, sometimes cruelly and sometimes very efficiently, but it's very cynical, and that's why people use the phrase Machiavellian to describe that behavior. However, later in his life, he died in poverty, and later in his life, he wrote some amazing things called the Discourses. They were about Roman history, and there's a whole section that you might want to look at entitled The Multitude is Wiser and More Constant Than a Prince. And it basically puts forth the very strong thing, which I wish some of our founding fathers would have read, that you should always trust the mob, because whatever mistakes they made, can be softened, but the only way to solve a prince problem is with cold steel, as he says. And he said that any group of individuals lowly, if two people give them the facts of either side of a case, kind of like the jury system, they will make the wise decision because people have that wisdom and they should be trusted to govern themselves.
Whoa.
And so he really stood up in a very interesting way for those kind of thoughts.
That's fascinating. Thank you for that, Beth. You've given me homework.
Yeah, so the discourses. Yeah. But here's the thing. I think for a few years now, I don't care what the surveys say about, only 45% of people really believe global warming is a huge problem. I think that's a complete crock, because I think that's what's troubling people. All around the world, people see the garbage patch in the Pacific. They see smoke going up in the air in some of these newly industrialized countries. They see they see flooding in Bangladesh and storms and all these things. And they know that it's climate change, and they know it's because our greed and our empire building have brought us to this. And I think collectively we're all going through kind of a little nervous breakdown of, this feels out of control to me. What am I going to do? Where are my grandchildren going to be? I have a niece that has a little girl, and I think by the time she's 40, what kind of world will she live in? You know, so we got to do something about it, and that's why the youth got to keep voting and get us smart again.
Yeah,
we can do it.
And the Democratic Party needs a major outreach to the Zoomers, to the generation coming up.
Absolutely. Let's attack the underpinnings of this thing.
I'm with you, Beth. Thank you for that, and thank you for the further information on Mr. Machiavelli. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
From Dark Money, the hidden history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right, in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, a liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap-and-trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries' PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that y'all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, the hidden history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right, by Jane Mayer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Some just absolutely remarkable work has been done over the years by the Satanic Temple, this group of folks who are challenging basically the merger of church and state across the United States, whether it's, Ten Commandments, monuments, or now abortion. On the line with us is Chalice Blythe, the media relations specialist with the Satanic Temple Reproductive Rights Campaign. Their website is thesatanictemple.com /pages/RRR-campaign. But you just start out with thesatanictemple.com and you'll get there. Chalice Blythe has a Twitter handle, CHALICEBLYTHE, or at Satanic_Temple. Chalice, welcome to the program. Tell us about the Satanic Temple's Sam Alito's Mom's Religious Abortion Clinic. I love this. Tell us about it.
Well, thanks for having me on and giving me the ability to talk about it. So our clinic is a religious abortion clinic that serves the purpose of providing abortifacient medication for those who want to perform our religious abortion ritual. So it is currently, so today's day one, February 14th, and we are already getting calls, scheduling calls with patients. So this is a telehealth clinic. So that means that this is all done over telehealth, online. There's going to be no brick or mortar. And we are currently serving those in New Mexico who are wanting to perform the religious abortion rituals. So how this works is prospective patients will complete a brief confidential online screening form and review information on performing TST's religious abortion ritual. A telehealth video appointment with a licensed healthcare practitioner will then be scheduled, and eligible patients will then be able to order medication, abortifacients, from our partner pharmacy, Honeybee Health. And the medication can be discreetly packaged and can arrive in the mail 2 to 3 days after the order is placed. And then, of course, our telehealth staff, who are a collection of registered nurses. We also have advanced licensed nurse practitioners who are available by phone, text, or video chat every step of the way. We also have ordained ministers of Satan that can also assist people with the religious abortion ritual if they'd like. I love it. So basically, the anti-abortion folks, most of them are coming out of either Catholicism or the right-wing Protestant evangelical movement that had been pro-abortion, but in 1980, hooked up with the Reagan campaign and Jerry Falwell and all these guys, and decided that anti-abortion was where the money was and the voters. And so, they're arguing. I haven't heard an explicit argument that abortion should be made illegal because of the Bible. Because of their religious beliefs. They're trying to claim that it's all about life and when does life begin. But when does life begin, I think, is, outside of viability, pre-viability is, I would argue, a religious issue, if not at least a philosophical issue. So do you think that by defining getting an abortion as being an official religious practice, and you guys are a religion, you're a 501c3, I'm assuming, a nonprofit. The IRS has recognized you as a religion. Do you think that that's going to stand up to a court challenge? Have there been any attempts at this? Are you aggressively trying to litigate on behalf of this, or has anybody come after you yet? So to your point about the, the moral aspect of acquiring an abortion, whether that is the, whether that has to do with the killing of a unique individual being, that is purely a religious opinion. Science and medicine, when it comes to the act of abortion, that is a medical procedure, and the medical procedure is based off of scientific fact. Now, when it comes to how a Satanist views a pregnancy, it's entirely dependent on them. There are Satanists who would not choose abortion for themselves. They would not choose to have the religious abortion ritual for themselves. But there are others who would, and it's entirely up to them. So when we are making a point about abortion or having a religious abortion ritual being a religious act, it is directly associated with our tenets. Specifically, we have tenets about one's body is inviolable, subject to one's own alone, and we also have a tenet relating to basing our best understanding of the world on best scientific evidence available. And we also have tenets relating to justice, seeking justice, and whether that is in defiance of laws and institutions. When it comes to protecting our religious practice, when it comes to laws that have been created to limit or completely outlaw abortion access, these are laws that are based entirely on a religious point of view. They have no basis in medicine. They have no basis on the best scientific evidence available, and these laws are not meant to protect. They are meant to dissuade and actually cause harm. Whether or not anybody will publicly say that's what they're based on, we know what they're based on because we know that they are not medically necessary prohibitions. And we've actually seen, especially in Texas, where these laws meant to prohibit are actually killing people because of that. So, because of our beliefs, because of our tenets, we feel that when it comes to our bodily autonomy, that we should be able to make those decisions for ourselves. And when it comes to the religious abortion ritual, we practice ritual as a way to give ourselves catharsis. We practice ritual as a way to kind of get a mental or emotional feeling from that practice, whether it's the recitation of words or some kind of act that one does. And so this religious ritual is meant to provide that catharsis. It is meant to provide, support, comfort, and kind of help remove the shame and guilt that would be placed upon somebody who is otherwise just trying to engage in their free religious practice, making decisions about their own bodies.
Now, you guys have been in court around, Ten Commandments statues and things like that in Alabama and, as I recall, Wisconsin. Correct me what states you've been in court around this, and you've won a bunch of these cases. Yeah. And but this particular one has not been litigated yet. Is that correct?
So we actually do have a couple of court cases pending in Texas, and I do believe also in Idaho, relating to the state's bans on access to abortion, which prohibits our members from practicing the religious abortion ritual. So we do have lawsuits pending for that. But as you know, with the legal system, everything takes a long time. The lawsuits have been filed. We are challenging that, and we are challenging it under RFRA laws that are specifically written to protect, religious practice, the freedom of religious practice, and institute that no state, whether state or federal, can make laws that prohibit the free religious exercise.
Tell me about the uterati.
Uterati. We want to make sure that when we're talking about reproductive justice, when we talk about those who are capable of reproduction, we want to make sure we're incredibly inclusive. It is not just cisgender women that require, require abortion or want to engage in the religious abortion rituals. So I don't know if I don't know if I coined the term, but I like to refer to myself as a member of the uterati. Somebody who is capable of physically capable of reproduction, therefore someone who is subject to all these prohibitions, and somebody who, if I decide to, would be in need of doing the religious abortion ritual.
Yeah, it's great having a uterus essentially. We're talking with Chalice Blythe, the media relations specialist with the Satanic Temple's Reproductive Rights Campaign. Chalice, we're just about out of time. Any final notes or information that you want to be sure to share with our listeners that I might not have asked you about or led to?
Yeah, so if people want to get more information about the clinic, again, we did open today, February 14th, and already taking, already scheduling patients.
Mm-hmm.
They can go to tsthealth.org.
TST as in the Satanic Temple Health.
Yeah,
tsthealth.org. Okay.
Yep, tsthealth.org. All the information as far as how to schedule, and all the information you would possibly need, any questions you have about the clinic, as well as our religious abortion ritual is there. Contact information on how to get a hold of us if there's anything there that isn't covered. And if you are somebody who is able to access if you are somebody in New Mexico or somebody who has access to
an honor, in fact.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a moment. We got this new amendment to bar Nebraska kids from going to church camps. Really, I think they should add the Bible to this. And should private companies be going rogue to cool the atmosphere? Welcome back. Fred in Bellflower, California. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. Love your show.
Thank you.
Can you hear me good?
I hear you fine, Fred.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking another mass shooting, and something has got to be done, and the majority of the country wants something done. Mm-hmm. And it takes forever for laws to be passed because one group, basically the Republicans, are blocking everything from happening.
Yep.
And I was thinking, we're at a point where it's ridiculous. It's insanity when you keep trying the same thing over and over and nothing happens. So I was thinking that you have a lot of smart listeners, and maybe you could have them email you ideas that would actually get something done quickly, instead of waiting for some politicians to get some morals or a conscience or something like that. I'm wondering if all wrote down ideas that they thought were maybe revolutionary or something that would catch your eye, mm-hmm. and you looked through the majority of them and found something good and said, hey, now, because Biden says this country is capable of anything, and I agree with him. The people in this country are inventive and creative, and I think your audience has that type of mentality.
Yeah. There's other venues, Fred, that are better than that. I can tell you right now, I get several hundred emails a day from people talking about politics, and the only way I can find them is by going into my spam folder, because I got a whole bunch of words having to do with politics, and if they come from somebody who's not in my contact list, they go directly to spam. Because I just don't have the bandwidth to do this. I'm sorry. I work a 12-hour day right now, producing this show, performing this show, and then writing my op-eds for Hartmann Report. But there are organizations and websites. Daily Kos is really a great one. They're very, very active in the election process. Anybody can join and become a community member, and then you can write your own article about, hey, this is what we should do, and you can post it there, and if people like it, it'll float up to the top, unless you're me, in which case somebody will come along and dump it down to the bottom. I don't know why, but this has been happening a lot lately. But in any case, I still recommend Daily Kos, and there's other sites too. Democratic Underground is a good one, where you can post things. You can participate with indivisible.org. There are some smaller organizations. Our Revolution is still around. Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org is still around. Ourrevolution.com. Those places and those organizations are set up to do what you're talking about. And I'm not only not set up to do that, but I'm set up to avoid avoid that because I'm just buried in the work that I'm doing as it is. But I understand your sentiment, Fred, and I'd encourage you to check out some of these sites or even write a piece. Another one is opednews.com, which is run by my friend Rob Call. They will publish unpublished, works by people who have not been published elsewhere. It's harder to get into some of the websites like Salon and Slate and stuff like that. But Daily Kos is great. Democratic Underground is great. Op-Ed News, Fred. I think you'll find it useful. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So everybody knows that George Santos is from a district that Joe Biden won by 3rd district, although there was a kind of a gerrymandering, a reapportionment thing that happened there. But it's generally a Democratic district, and if Santos falls, there's probably going to be a Democratic replacement. But that's just the beginning of the story. David Vallejo in California's 22nd district, for example, represents a district that Biden carried by 16 points. Young Kim in California's 40th, Biden carried by 15 points. Mike Garcia in California's 27th, Biden carried by 18 points. Biden carried by 11 points, Oregon's 5th, Lori Chavez Duremer. Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania's 1st, Biden carried it by 14 points. I've got a whole video that lists all of these. There's 18 of them that should be easy pickups for the Democrats in 2024. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour. A couple of other stories here I wanted to share with you very quickly. There is this amendment in Lincoln, Nebraska, an Omaha lawmaker. Lincoln is the dateline for this. It's from the Omaha World Herald. An Omaha lawmaker set the internet abuzz recently, article by Martha Stoddard, with an attempt to ban minors from church camps, vacation Bible study classes, and other, quote, religious indoctrination camps. What's happening is this is an amendment to Legislative Bill 371, which makes it a crime for people to bring minors to drag shows. I don't get why the right is so hysterical about this. They somehow think drag shows have something to do with sex. They don't. It's typically men dressing up as women, and it has to do with clothing. It has to do with persona. It has to do with, theater. Shows are when I was 17 years old, I used to DJ drag shows at Joe Cavello's Gay Bar, Michigan. It was great fun. There was nothing about sex. It was all about performance. It's art. Louise and I used to go together and we'd dance. When I wasn't DJing, we'd go and dance. I mean, it was just a wonderful place. And so these guys, first Vladimir Putin did this in Russia. Went after drag queens. Went after drag shows. Then Viktor Orban did it in Hungary. And now the entire Republican Party is doing this in the United States. This is one of the predictable steps in the move toward authoritarian fascism. So this legislator, Nebraska State Senator Megan Hunt, came along and said, okay, cool, you want to have a bill that's going to ban minors from going to drag shows. Why don't we also ban minors from going to church camps, vacation Bible study classes, and religious indoctrination camps? In her amendment, which generally mirrors the bill, which she opposes, she starts out by laying out legislative findings that there is, quote, a well-documented history of indoctrination and sexual abuse perpetrated by religious leaders and clergy people upon children, end quote. I guarantee you there's more children abused, sexually and otherwise, more children abused at church camps than at drag shows. No children are abused at drag shows. It's up drag queen story hour. Again, you've got somebody, in drag performing essentially, for the kids. It's like, I don't mean to equate drag or people in drag with clowns, but it's kind of the same thing. It's somebody dressed up as something that they're not, but something that is kind of cute and kind of interesting and kind of fascinating. And, reading books to children with lots of theater. Because, every drag queen I've ever known, and I don't even know if that phrase is still acceptable, but it certainly was in the 60s when I was DJing at Joe Cavello's. Everyone I've ever known was just a wonderful person. And these are like the kind of outgoing people who just, they love other people. They love the performance. It's just, this is terrible. This is, the amendment is great. Obviously, it's not going to go anywhere. The Republicans control the legislature there in Nebraska. By the way, Dianne Feinstein just announced that she's not running for re-election in California. So now it's wide open. You got Katie Porter and Adam Schiff are the leading candidates. I think Ro Khanna should jump into this race, too. We'll continue the conversation in a minute.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I gotta tell you, also, if we're banning books, I've got one in particular that probably should be banned from the schools. I'll tell you about that right after the break, and then I'll pick up your calls. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show the three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's number 3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the 3 mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana Godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex.
Exposed here for the first time, Cantex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. Two of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almaheda coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names two of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people. Legacy.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Wondering what this new legislative session, the next 2 years, are going to bring us with Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives? Well, Congressman Bill Pascrell put together a list that kind of summarizes what we should expect. 100% of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against cheaper gas for Americans, voted against cheaper insulin for Americans, voted against cheaper prescription drug prices, 100% voted against child tax credits, 100% voted against stimulus checks, 100% voted against the Voting Rights Act. They voted 100% voted against ending gerrymandering. They voted 100% against ending climate change. 100% voted against prosecuting rich tax cheats. 100% voted against saving Roe v. Wade. 99% voted against banning assault weapons or fighting domestic terrorism. The list goes on. I've got an entire video all about the entire list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. It's 35 minutes past the hour. So we talked about this Omaha State Legislature, Omaha, Nebraska legislator who is attaching an amendment to a bill banning drag shows in the states that says that banning young people and teenagers from going to drag shows. This is, quote, a well-documented history of indoctrination of sexual abuse perpetrated by religious leaders and clergy people upon children is justification for banning minors from church camps, vacation Bible study classes, and other religious indoctrination camps. And I got to tell you, I went to one of these places when I was, I don't know, 8 years old, something like that. And ours was, mostly fun. There was the religious stuff was kind of small, but I understand some of them these days are just really like, indoctrination camps. But, if we're going to do this, if they're going to ban drag shows and they're going to ban books, and, now they're starting to burn books, and they're banning books from schools, they're banning books from libraries, all this kind of stuff. I've got a book I think they should ban. Because it's pornographic. This is just one sentence from, or one paragraph from this book. And my apologies, there are words in here that may offend some of you, but this is literally from this book, word for word. I haven't changed anything. It's from a modern translation. Quote, "Yet she became more and more promiscuous as she recalled the days of her youth when she was a prostitute in Egypt. There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of horses. So you longed for the lewdness of your youth, when in Egypt your bosom was caressed and your young breasts fondled." End of quote. That's Ezekiel 23, chapter 23, verses 19 through 22. This is pornography. I mean, you got the story of Lot sleeping with both his daughters and producing children, which were then part of the lineage that led right to Jesus. There's all kinds of this stuff in the Bible. Why are we not banning the Bible? If we're going to ban pornography from our schools, why is there not a movement to ban the Bible? I don't get it. I don't know of any of these publications that have as much violence, as much sex, as much hate as you will find in the Bible. Anyhow, end of rant. Let's pick up your phone calls here. Arnold in Roxborough, North Carolina. Hey, Arnold, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
I
will testify to the fact you told one caller earlier that you don't have no time in the day to do anything extra like that. Your 12 hours are spent just for this show. Because I'm listening. I said at the time I'm sitting here on the cube, I've heard so many beautiful, nice subject matters. You got a treasure trove of subject matters here.
Thank you.
That I can speak on. I can speak on every one of them. The one you talking about Social Security, man, that really got me. I was really happy. I listened to what you said about that. How the Republicans and how that old feeble Biden caught him off guard on State of Union night and he trapped him. and they just fell for it. And it was just, because they stood there in front of the cameras. Oh, no, not us. You're a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. If they could wipe out Social Security tomorrow, it would be gone tomorrow.
Yeah. They do it if they could.
The thing of it is, Tom, I'm a firm believer that if they would just raise certain measurements on Social Security, and the main thing is to put the money they took out of the Social Security Trust Fund back in there. When they made all these weapon programs and stuff that they did, spent that money on other things.
Well, they haven't actually taken the money out of the Social Security Trust Fund. It's intact. That's kind of a Republican talking point, but I agree with Al Gore that it should be more intact. It should be circumscribed. There should be kind of a wall around it. But because the Social Security Trust Fund invests in a particular type of treasury that was created by an act of Congress that can be redeemed at any moment, and that is only available to the Social Security Administration, it's really hard.
True today?
That's true right now, and so it's really hard for any Congress to raid Social Security right now. So you can set aside worrying about that, Arnold.
Right. Well, you see, when you said that they should be increasing the benefit by $200 a month.
Yep.
The way things are, this is the first time I've been on Social Security since 2016, and I retired long distance truck driver, and I came out early. I came out before 65. Right, and I think around at 63, and because
because, I ain't got no business up there on the road, 65 years old, driving an 18-wheeler, dangerous as they're nowadays.
Yeah.
But that's all I did. That's what I did all my adult life.
Yeah.
And
well, now you got Republicans who want to raise that to 70. They want you driving that truck till you're 70 years old.
Yeah, I want to drive.
Which is nuts.
72, stuff like that. It's crazy where they doing it. And then they don't want to own up to it when Biden had them all trapped. Rick Scott and Lee was just shaking his head back and forth, saying, "Oh, no, that's a lie, that's a lie." But that, what he was telling was true.
Yeah, no, Mike Lee actually, to a group of private donors, the video's leaked now, said he wants to pull Social Security up by the root, and dispose of it. So, yeah, I'm with you. Oh, you just, apparently our caller just hung up on himself. It just vanished off the board. So let's go to Vincent in Indianapolis. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I appreciate your show and everything you and your team do. I thought earlier in your show, you had mentioned the ballot abuse felony in Arizona, and that was the first that I had heard of that. And I thought about it, and I concluded it was actually a shame that law survived judicial scrutiny, including going all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, it's actually illogical in nature. So, like, the presumption is that it exists to prevent voter fraud, right? Well, in order to prove that case, the district attorney or prosecutor's office would have to prove that the ballots being carried, in this case by the mayor or whomever else, actually legitimately belonged to other voters. So in the course of their pursuing that charge, they would know already that it wasn't actually legitimate voter fraud, and it serves no real purpose.
Oh, it wasn't even defined as voter fraud. It was simply defined as a violation of a law that says it is illegal to carry ballots to the post office on behalf of anybody who's not a direct family member. And which is nuts in a town where there's no postal delivery, where everybody has to go to the post office if they want to vote. They have to bring their ballot to the post office. And in some cases, the post office is 20 miles away. And these are people who are these are mostly farm workers. It's a 95% Hispanic community with an average income of $15,000 a year, and most of these people work as farm workers. And as farm workers, they literally work from sun up to sundown, from like 6 or 7 in the morning till 6 or 7 at night. And the post office is not open before 6 in the morning or after 6 at night.
Yeah, and it's just what legitimate state purpose could that law serve?
It's the suppression of Democratic voters. Pure and simple.
Absolutely. I couldn't.
It would have been illegal if the Supreme Court hadn't gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It would have been illegal.
Just a darn shame.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Vincent, thank you. Thanks for weighing in and a great point you made. Bob in Otis, Indiana. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Well, I hope this finds you reasonably well.
Thank you.
I am. Glad to hear that. Well, I started collecting Social Security in 1998 on disability. And if they were to raise the cap and we would get that $200 a month now, I would make history because I did the math, and I would finally be $5 above poverty level.
Wow. There you go.
So, hey, that'd be good news.
Yeah, I think it would be good news for the nation. I mean, it would be an economic stimulus. It would be the right thing to do. It would be, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and Jan Schakowsky are pushing this, and I hope that they get more people behind them. And, you can call your federal representatives, your 2 senators and your member of the House of Representatives, and let them know that you would like to see the cap raised, with this new bill that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Jan Schakowsky have put. If you're calling a House member, you mention Jan Schakowsky. If you're calling a Senate member, mention, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. And they'll know what you're talking about, because this needs to happen. Bob, I'm sorry, Bob. We're out of time.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back, Tom in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hey, always good to hear and help you educate the misinformed and the uninformed.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, here's a big one. This just came out on major news services last night. Ron DeSantis used to teach high school.
Right.
And his students are coming out right now revealing what he taught in his history class. And what he taught was, he said the South was justified in a war with the North because their property and their businesses were being attacked. But he unfortunately failed to teach them, even though it goes against the Constitution, and their business was people.
Right, their property was people, literally, and
right,
yeah,
exactly.
I've seen several stories to this effect. Apparently, he really creeped out a lot of his students. I mean, he used to go to drinking parties with them, and some of, particularly the girls. And Donald Trump is tweeting the pictures of Ron DeSantis with the girls with the beer, and calling him a groomer. And DeSantis is refusing to respond. He's saying, "I'm going to keep my mind on helping the people of Florida." And then, of course, you got the people who are saying that he was teaching history from the point of view of the Confederacy, which, you know, shouldn't surprise anybody, I suppose. But excellent point.
Exactly.
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks a lot. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Well, I was going to say one last point. In the last 4 years, the mass shooting rate across the whole United States has quadrupled. It's doubled every year.
Wow.
And right now we got 67 mass shootings. We're not even halfway through February.
I think in the last decade, we've added something like 80 million guns to America. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but it's some mind-boggling number of guns. When Ronald Reagan became president, you know, about 5 or 6 out of every 100 citizens in Europe own a gun. About 25 or 30, I'm doing this from memory, so fact check me, but my recollection is it's 25 or 30 out of every 100 Canadians own a gun, because there's a lot of hunting in Canada. And in America, it was the same thing in 1980. We were just about exactly with Canada, 25 or 30. Now, every American every person in America, theoretically, owns 1 point something guns, because we've got over 420 million guns, and we've only have 330 million Americans. So that has all happened in the last 40 years. So, you know, spot on. And it's really problematic, Tom, because you know, if somebody, so many of these mass shootings are actually suicides. There are people who want to commit suicide and they want to go out in a blaze of glory. I'm convinced that's what the Michigan State University guy was. They're all sitting around going, "What was the motive? What was the motive?" Well, you know, after he killed these people, he shot himself in the head. I mean, you know, that should tell you everything. You know, it's not that he was afraid of going to prison. It's what he wanted to do to get, you know, from the get-go, but he wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. And I'm guessing probably, I mean, this is just a guess, but I'm guessing probably at least half of these mass shootings are variations on that. And, you know, it's like if those people didn't have access to the guns, they wouldn't be doing this going out in a blaze of glory stuff. They would just be quietly killing themselves, you know, by slitting their wrists in the bathtub like they do in Canada or they do in Europe. Tom, I got to run, but thank you for the call. I think your points are very, very well made. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in 60 seconds, Sean. Is that right? We'll be back in 60 seconds with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only very slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. Just some amazing stuff going on over on Fox News. Megan Lapp and David Stevenson have been regular guests across Fox News, and they're claiming to be all worried about whales, all these whales that are dying off the east coast of the United States, arguing that these are the result of the windmills that are out there, right? The ocean wind and the work done to install them. Well, it turns out that Lapp works for an organization whose largest donor is Charles Koch, whose largest donor is the Texas Public Policy Foundation that gets their money from Charles Koch. And Stevenson works for a group whose largest donor, the Caesar Rodney Institute, is the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. So if you have friends who are watching Fox News and they're concerned about the whales, you might want to let them know what's going on. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. That's before the hour. Steve in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's up?
All the hubbub over the classified documents that they're finding in all these different members of the executive branch.
Right. They got one more up in Pence's house after the FBI did their search on Friday.
Right. All of these people have duties that require that they act quickly in an emergency. And not having something at home and having an emergency, not knowing who to contact, how to contact them, and what to do in that first critical 24 hours is something they have to have on hand. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that those instructions are changed frequently.
Yeah, but not after they leave office. I mean, the thing that totally creeps me out, Steve, is that this fellow who works with Donald Trump in one of the right-wing super PACs or something had classified documents on a thumb drive attached to his laptop. Well, what the hell was he doing with those things? Was he emailing them to Saudi Arabia or to Putin?
Or maybe he was just storing them improperly to have quick access to them.
But why even scan them in the first place? They say top secret on them.
Yeah, I know. I realize that, but
I think, Trump is getting, some reports are suggesting that Trump is getting hundreds of millions of dollars from Mohammed bin Salman through the being basically laundered through this Live Gulf thing. Others are suggesting it's only a few million. Whatever it is, it's a hell of a lot of money. His son-in-law got $2 billion. Trump just signed a deal for $4 billion to build a Trump hotel in one of the Middle Eastern countries that's associated with MBS. I think that they're paying him off for handing classified documents off to them. I absolutely believe that to be the case.
I agree
have no
with
proof,
Tom,
but
on that. I do.
I think that's what's going on.
That. I mean, I don't.
Why else would you scan classified documents and put them on a laptop?
Yeah, I agree with you there. And the other point I wanted to make is about Social Security. It's a pay-as-you-go system.
Right.
I worked for Social Security for 37 years. And it's clear that what we have now, or recently, is we're paying benefits to people who had high-paying jobs.
Yeah.
And it's on the backs of people who have low-paying jobs. But if the
problem with fixing that, Steve, is
if the wage base increases, the amount coming into the trust funds and the amount to pay current retirees will increase.
Yeah.
If you keep wages suppressed, Social Security will remain insolvent.
Oh, I get your point. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to raise the lower wages that people have been subject to for the last 30 to 40 years.
Yep.
Otherwise, the trust fund will stay, or Social Security will stay in jeopardy.
Yeah, that's a very effective way to inject cash into Social Security. You're absolutely right. It's to simply raise wages. Thank you, Steve. Excellent point. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Thanks, Tom. If Biden won't expand the Supreme Court to ban assault rifles, then it's not the Republicans' fault. It's our fault that our loved ones are getting killed. And I would suggest that we run a couple of progressives on the platform that I will expand the Supreme Court and we will ban assault rifles finally. And if fear is a motivator in voting, how about the fear of? Our youth vote has the fear of, and as the rest of us, the fear of assault rifles. And that would be a motivating factor for not only the youth, but all of us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. Well said. Paul in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Paul, what's up? Paul, we have about a minute left, by the way. Real quick one.
Okay. Yeah, you were talking about Dianne Feinstein finally deciding not to run. My concern is, and maybe it is not a concern at all, but that we've got three potentially great candidates, Ro Khanna, Adam Schiff, and Katie Porter.
I'd add Eric Swalwell to that, too.
Yeah, well, whichever they are, with all of them great. In some states, if you run in the primary, you can only run in one primary.
Right.
So if they ran in the senatorial primary, they would be giving up their congressional seat. Now, maybe with the way that California is doing the ranked voting now, that might not be in place.
Yeah, I confess, Paul, I don't know California law well enough to know if any of these guys, if they become serious candidates for Feinstein's seat, will have to give up their seat in the House. I just don't know. It's a great question. Next time Congressman Khan is on the program, is he going to be on this Friday, Sean? We don't think so. Okay, probably the week after. Next time he's on, I'll ask him about that. Unless, any of our callers know, and we can have that conversation tomorrow. But I'm sorry, I just don't know. Paul, thank you so much for the call. Thank you so much for being with us today. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place, same channel. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. It is the most important thing. Get involved. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.